If you follow the channel at all, you know I love a good obscure vintage computer, and today we have one that is no exception. This is the Texas Instruments DS990 Model 1, and we're covering it today right here on Vintage Geek. Just a reminder, if you like what you see today, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps us a lot as we grow, but one thing that helps us the most is if you would consider becoming a Vintage Geek member. You can do it at the website, and for just under $20 a year, you can get access to all of our video content commercial-free, plus extras and more. It's all at vintagegeek.com. Since we started the Vintage Geek Museum, I've had the pleasure of working with a number of different obscure computers, and the computer we're covering today is definitely one of them. This is a Texas Instruments DS990 Model 1. Now, I acquired this recently from someone on Facebook Marketplace that had discovered this particular machine in a building that had unfortunately gone through a fairly severe fire, which is why the machine looks like it does today. There was lots and lots of soot on this machine, and believe it or not, what you're seeing in this video looks quite a bit better than it did when we first brought it into the museum. We've only gone through one layer of cleaning so far. We've got a lot of work left to do, but I didn't want to wait to share this with everyone on the channel because I think this is a really interesting machine. Now, the nameplate on the back actually calls this an intelligent terminal, but I think it's actually a little bit more than that. Looking at some of the catalog entries back from 1979, it appears that this could be used as a standalone system. It has two 8-inch floppy drives that are in a separate chassis. Those floppies could be used to load its own operating system and language that you could use to run code of sorts. Now, that's about as much as I know about this machine. There's not a ton of history online on this, and I'm very much interested to find out if any of you out there are familiar with it. Maybe you have some experience that you'd like to share. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below because we're trying to learn more about this ourselves. I have no idea if this machine is in working condition or if it was in working condition when the fire occurred in the building that it was in. Overall, though, it looks like it's probably in okay shape other than the cosmetic damage on the outside. And I have to say above all else that this is just a cool looking machine. The minute I saw the pictures of this on the Marketplace listing, I just thought, this looks like something from Fallout, which of course I've been watching recently on Amazon. The overall aesthetic of this is really cool. I want to take a close look at everything that comprises the DS990 system from Texas Instruments. We of course have the terminal and the drive unit, so let's get into it here on Vintage Geek. Let's start by taking a look at the disk drive chassis that came with the system. This is actually called the FD1000 tabletop chassis. I think tabletop is a term that they use a little bit loosely here. This thing will take up the entire tabletop. It's a very large chassis. This reminds me a lot in size and form factor of the Centurion server that we have here in the museum that we've covered on the channel in the past. It's definitely along the same lines weight-wise and overall size-wise. There isn't a lot to discuss on the front of the chassis here. We've got two 8-inch floppy drives, and below that, of course, we have the label of the FD1000 chassis as well as an LED power indicator. That's really all you get in the front panel of this unit. Then you have the bulk of the case itself. When you look at the back panel, there's not a lot happening there either. You've got a power cord, you've got a simple on-off toggle switch, and you have the DB25 port that did come with a cable that would connect this directly to the terminal unit. From everything I've read about the DS990 system, it appears that the floppy drive cage will allow you to run software on its own on the terminal rather than just being a terminal connected to a larger system. So I feel like this is definitely an important part of the system overall. I've also read that the terminal could be used with other TI systems, such as the larger 9900 series. Again, we welcome your expertise. Now I want to take a look at what's inside the drive chassis and kind of see how this is all put together. It's really just an impressive unit. The whole thing is built in a very industrial way, and these drives are absolutely massive. One thing I find interesting about the TI design here is that the front panel actually puts the drive eject buttons within the bezel of the plate that they manufactured, which kind of gives it a cool look and an interesting feel when you actually eject a disk. I noticed right away that both of these 8-inch floppy drives are CUME drives. That name may sound familiar because when we were looking at the Centurion Micro Plus, we actually noticed that it had a CUME drive as well. I don't remember if it's the exact same model as these, but it's very, very similar. Speaking of drive models, of the two drives that we have in the chassis here, they are both DT8 type CUME drives. Interestingly though, the left-hand drive, as I'm looking at it, is the D/T8, and the other one is the DT/8. I don't know if that was just a defect in printing the labels or or if one was correct and the other one wasn't, but I actually don't know what that means. I just thought it was something interesting to note. Aside from the drives themselves, which actually look pretty clean, there isn't a lot of buildup and dirt and residue inside this, so whatever fire this thing survived, it didn't really get in the chassis, which I'm very pleased to see. There is a separate power supply chassis toward the rear of the unit, and a very bulky industrial type fan that's going to keep things cool in the very back panel. The card that actually interfaces the ribbon cable to the DB25 connector is labeled the DSDD drive adapter card. I was reading that there were different configurations available for this particular drive cage. You could have single density, double density, so I'm reading this to mean double-sided double density, and that is the type of adapter that's in place. I don't know if that means that there would be a different card for the other types of drives. I have to assume yes, but I don't know enough about it to say for sure. But other than that, this chassis looks pretty basic. The ribbon cables themselves are just going from the drives to that adapter card and straight out the back into the DB25 connector. There aren't many other electronics in the case other than the power supply, so there's not a whole lot to talk about, other than the sheer size and magnitude of the overall unit, which is pretty cool. I like the fact that Texas Instruments actually put their own serial number badges on the drives themselves, even though they're CUME drives, and they did have the overall serial number badge inside the chassis as well toward the back. A well-assembled unit, everything looks pretty good, and I wouldn't be surprised if this unit would power up. We're not going to try that just yet. And now we get to the DS990 Model 1 Intelligent Terminal, and I love the look of this thing. It's just such an interesting aesthetic, despite the fact that this has been in a fire, and as you see the shots up close, you're going to notice just how much soot damage this thing has taken and how much cleaning we're going to have to do ultimately. It's a really cool design, and I think there are some really unique features about this. I want to start with the keyboard itself. So the main part of the keyboard is your standard keyboard that we've seen on many other terminals and devices. I did notice though that it has an enter key and a return key, the enter key being on the left-hand side of the keyboard and the return key being on the right. That seems a little bit unique. As far as the number pad goes, you have your standard placement to the right of the keyboard, but then to the left of the keyboard, you've got another field of keys that is similar in size to the number pad arrangement, but this has your arrows and other movement keys to move around, presumably the screen. There are a set of 10 function keys across the top, which is similar to other systems, and overall the key movement is pretty decent. It would be similar to some of their other terminals in the series. In fact, we have another one here at the museum that reminds me a lot of this particular design and layout. Now above the keyboard, we actually have an area that I assume would have been for placing pieces of paper or things you were looking at. There's kind of an inset in the plastic where you could set a document or something you're looking at. To the left and right of that are two rectangular areas, and from other pictures I've seen, it seems like maybe the brand of the company that was reselling these units would have put their own labels on there. So for instance, if there was an office supply company that was reselling TI computers, you may have seen their name badge in this area that's directly adjacent to where you would put your paper for reading. Now the right-hand panel should have been another plastic insert on ours as well, but it does appear that it's missing. Those were removable, and I'm not exactly sure why. I'm not sure if you could put something else in there, some kind of an add-on. I didn't see any images in the catalog to really indicate what that removable panel was particularly for, but ours is missing the one on the right. Now above all of that, of course, is the actual monitor itself. This particular monitor is removable from what I've seen. We're going to try that here in a minute. I believe it connects with some kind of DB connector to the main chassis and would be your standard monochrome type display that would be common in terminals at the time. Again though, love the design of this, kind of the futuristic space age looking design from the late 70s, this being, I presume, a 1979 era system. Everything just kind of fits that aesthetic, and I love the way it all comes together. On the back of the unit, we do have our power cord, fuse holder, power switch, and we have a series of DB25 ports. Now I have not gotten deep enough into the documentation to tell you what all those ports are for, but I know that one of them is to connect to the FD1000 drive chassis. I assume one has to be to connect a printer somehow, and maybe one's for a serial device. All in all, it appears there's plenty of connectivity in the back. I just don't know what it's all for just yet. Opening up the DS990 Model 1 was an interesting experience. The whole latch assembly to lift up the top like the hood of a car is actually pretty cool. I do like the design of this box overall. I'm not sure why all these different panels are removable, but they are. You can remove the left and right panels from the front, as well as the area that, again, I assume is for holding papers or something like that. But once I have the actual device open, the inside of this is even more interesting. Now, unfortunately, it looks like the terminal itself must have been in the brunt of the smoke damage from the fire. There is a lot of evidence inside that smoke did get inside this unit, unlike the drive assembly, which was pretty clean inside. This one looks like it's going to require a lot more cleaning. But at least we can see the overall components of the system and how things are laid out. Now I noticed that there is a separate power transformer that the AC line goes into here, and following that is a kind of card cage assembly that's going to have 3 different cards in it. Now I assume those are for each of the voltages the system requires. I seem to recall reading that there were 3 voltages in the system. Each one of these is a different regulator board for those different voltages, so we should be able to troubleshoot that fairly easily and get the supplies working. Now looking a little bit further over inside the unit, there is an array of cards in the system. There's a backplane and a motherboard that these all plug into. I'm not sure if the order of the cards and the placement in the slots actually makes a difference, or if this is just a kind of uniform backplane. But I'm going to go through the cards that I've discovered in the system so far in kind of just doing an initial overview and looking at them one by one. Looking at the first card toward the front of the system, we see that we have a DS990 chip on a card, which I assume would be the main processing board of this particular intelligent terminal. Behind that, we have a card that is for the floppy disk interface. That includes the ribbon cable that goes to the DB connector on the back that would actually connect to the floppy drive cage. Going one card further back, we have what I have to assume, even though it's not labeled as such, is the adapter for the video display. I'm assuming that because the actual cable that's plugged into it goes to the DB9 on top of the unit that plugs into the monitor. By logical inference, that's how that would make sense. There's not a lot of other information on the card to say specifically what that device is doing. Then the next card we have is the RAM card. This one is a 64K RAM card. It seems like that was the standard amount of RAM that would come with this system from everything that I've read. And curiously, behind that, we have another card that has a DS990 chip on it. This one also has a ribbon cable that goes to the actual keyboard of the system. I'm not sure why there were dual 9900 processors in this system. Again, if any of you out there are TI experts and can shed a little bit more light on how the system functioned originally, that would be super helpful here. But I'm going to move on to the next card. We have 2 cards that look identical to me. These are both asynchronous data interface cards. I'm guessing that the 2 asynchronous data interface cards would go to the ports on the back of the unit and would connect to other devices in perhaps a larger TI system, but I don't know for sure. And behind all of those cards, which have the removable tabs, there is a very small card that I have not removed from the system yet because it's very, very firmly implanted in its socket, and I'm not sure what that card does. But overall, this does have a full complement of interface cards in it, and they look like they're in okay shape cosmetically from what I can see. Now that I see the overall design of the system, I'm a little bit wary to do any power supply testing just yet. I'd like to get into each one of these regulator cards, make sure we check all the capacitors and components, and just make sure things are in overall clean condition before we apply any kind of power to this. But I'm excited about the potential for this Texas Instruments DS990 Model 1 system. There is some info out there that I found about getting the disk images, because as I understand it, you do have to have one of those original 8-inch floppies to be able to make this system boot into any kind of operating mode. I'm hoping we can get our hands on those and we can do some testing to maybe get this system up and running and see what it can actually do. Overall, I'm really impressed with the Texas Instruments DS990 Model 1 and its overall build quality and engineering. We're going to take some time with this machine, really go through the power supplies and all of the various electronic sections, and of course clean up all of the smoke damage. We might even have to start calling the machine Old Smoky. In any case, we're glad to have it in the museum, and I'm glad to be able to cover it today here on Vintage Geek. Just a reminder, if you like vintage computers like the one we covered today, be sure to like and subscribe. And one thing that helps us out a tremendous amount is if you would consider becoming a Vintage Geek member. You can do that at our website, and for just under $20 a year, you get access to all of our video content commercial free, plus some added features and extras as well. It's all at vintagegeek.com. Until next time, I'm Aaron, and this has been Vintage Geek.